The honeymoon phase is over with President Joe Biden, and his approval rating is tanking. One poll showing that it dropped almost 10 percentage points. Now, some polls are still saying he's doing all right, but across the board, it seems that disapproval is now surpassing Joe Biden's approval rating. And I think this has a lot to do with COVID, potential lockdowns, more COVID restrictions, but also leftist politics in general. At the same time that Joe Biden's approval is tanking, support for Black Lives Matter continues to drop. Now, obviously, among the partisans, this is all predictable. Democrats still overwhelmingly support Black Lives Matter, and Joe Biden Republicans still overwhelmingly disapprove of both. But among independent voters, the most important block for 2022 coming up next year will be independent voters. Republicans going to vote Republican, Democrats going to vote Democrat. Where will the independent voters end up? And I think it's starting to look like it will be with the Republicans. Now, keep in mind, a lot of independent voters are independent because they don't like either. And it may be that many independent voters go libertarian, which is the third biggest party, and then the Republicans still don't win. But I think people are starting to wake up to what's happening with the economy. They're starting to realize that Joe Biden doesn't have any answers. There are now rumors that the restrictions we're seeing will ultimately evolve into lockdowns in the next couple of weeks. And we're getting some chatter. It may actually happen in Israel, one of the countries with the highest rates of vaccination. I think people are kind of getting tired of the double standard, the hypocrisy. Not only is support for Joe Biden going down, but support for the January 6 hearings is also relatively low. It's going down. People don't want this stuff. They don't care about this stuff. And they don't want the double standards. At the same time, we've seen a poll from Rasmussen saying people actually want a congressional hearing into the Black Lives Matter riots. So why? Is the media still dominated by this stuff? Why is the conversation still as though Americans actually support leftist politics and the president and the Democratic Party when it seems like they don't? One of the most shocking things that I think is actually going to precipitate another decline in Joe Biden's approval is that he's effectively admitted his actions today on the eviction moratorium are illegal and will not pass constitutional muster. Some Republicans and some conservatives are saying, good, that's the way the game is played now. Why bother actually trying to follow the law when you can just do it and then get into a lawsuit after the fact and see if you can win? I want to take a look at what was going on with the current state of public opinion. And when I noticed that independent voters were swinging away from the policies that Democrats were pushing, it seems to me like there may be some light at the end of the tunnel, though it is always darkest before the dawn. And to be completely honest, this country has its ebbs and flows. It goes Democrat, it goes Republican. You know, what may be happening is that a lot of people voted in Democrats, and now they're starting to sour on those Democrats, and the tide is continuing to push towards Republicans. Now, we'll see ultimately. I mean, Donald Trump did get about, 12 million more votes than he got in 2020 than he got in 2016. A lot of people still voted for Joe Biden. And I think it was because of the ease of access and the lockdowns take away people's entertainment and their sports, and they turn politics into their tribal sport. But now I think regular people in this country are fed up. They don't like the inflation. They don't like the fact that more restrictions are coming. Now New York City is implementing mask mandates, and people are probably saying, enough with this stuff. We want freedom back. Maybe we'll get it. Personally, I don't think so. I think so long as you have a Republican Party that does nothing, then people can oppose the Democrats all day and night. But what are they going to vote for? Maybe the answer is the Libertarian Party. I can't tell you for sure. But let's take a look at Joe Biden's approval rating, support for Black Lives Matter, and why this may be happening. Before we get started, of course, head over to timcast.com to become a member and get access to exclusive members-only segments from the Timcast IRL podcast. Of course, we had Charlie Kirk and Vosh debating last night, and we have an extended members-only debate, of which it's more so me debating and talking about other ideas, because I wanted to mostly just kind of moderate the debate. If you want to see that stuff, go to timcast.com, become a member, and help support our fierce and independent journalism. However, if you'd also like to support this video, just hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's get into this first story and see what's happening with Joe Biden's approval rating. The Hill reports Biden approval takes a hit as coronavirus surges, poll shows. We can see that according to Ground News, it is mostly Republicans reporting this. I should say conservatives and right-wing outlets. In which case, this may be news that many of your Democrat and lefty friends aren't aware of. And this is something they need to see. Let me stress this point to anybody who may be watching this on the left. I'm going to show you the civics breakdown, the polls with hundreds of thousands of responses between parties, the Democratic Party, the Republican, and independent voters. And I'm going to show you are losing independent voters. This is really good news for conservatives and Republicans, really bad news for Democrats. But in actuality, it could also be extremely good news for the Libertarian Party. They've been making waves recently, and confidence is building, though we'll see. The Hill reports President Biden and Congress's job approval are taking a hit amid a resurgence of the coronavirus. A Harvard Capps Harris poll surveyed released Monday found Biden's approval rating dropping to 52%. He may still be above water. Only 43% of respondents disapprove of the job he's doing in the Oval Office, but he's down 10 points from where he was in June when his approval was at 62%. Now, I just want to stop. I'm not a big fan of these polls, and I don't know how much I believe them, to be completely honest. Let's be real. We had many people, I'm going to show you the data, saying that the economy was great during the Trump years. Even Democrats thought the economy was good. How can you have independents, Republicans, and Democrats all in the majority saying the economy is great, and then Donald Trump's approval rating in the gutter the whole time? Okay, I'll be honest. It's because Donald Trump's character. I mean, I think we recognize that. One thing I've often said is I've run into so many people who said, I wish the man didn't tweet so much. We love the policies, but the dude can't keep his mouth shut. So, yeah, maybe people disapproved of his style, his demeanor. Ultimately, I think his style and demeanor actually helped him win the election. But I have to wonder if Trump was a little bit less bombastic, maybe he would have actually done way better in 2016. I mean, just think about it. Hillary Clinton. Awful, just really awful. It was a low bar for Trump, to be completely honest. He did an amazing job in 2020. Still, I wonder if you could have changed his speaking style and it would have been bigger for him. The Hill goes on to say Congress doesn't rate any better among voters. 45% say they approve of the way lawmakers are doing their jobs, down 9 points from June. Disapproval of Congress, meanwhile, rose from 46% to 55% in July. Both the GOP and Democratic Party are underwater, with disapproval of each rising to 52% and approval falling to 48%. Yes, this is exactly me. This is where I sit. Republicans don't do anything. They offer up no real meaningful opposition to the Democratic Party, and the Democrats are running around like chickens with their head cut off. It's just insane. Maxine Waters comes out. She says, ignore the Supreme Court, Joe Biden. Just enact another eviction moratorium. And then Joe Biden says, I'm going to do it, even though I know it's probably illegal. And I'm like, these people have lost it. Republicans, where are you? Do something. And they're sitting there and Mitch McConnell just goes, slow down there, Democrats. That's it. Republicans are effectively Democrats going the speed limit, as the joke is often stated. They say the across-the-board drop in approval comes amid broader concerns about the direction of the country, which has experienced a surge in COVID-19 cases in recent weeks as the more contagious Delta variant takes hold as the dominant strain in the U.S. That resurgence has put the coronavirus pandemic back at the top of the list of voters' concerns, according to the poll. 36% say that COVID-19 is the most important issue facing the country, a 6-point increase from June when jobs and the economy topped the list of concerns. The percentage of respondents who say the country is on the right track fell to 46% last month after peaking at 53% in June, according to the Harvard Capps Harris poll. The percentage who believe the country is on the wrong track simultaneously rose to 47% after dropping to 39% in June. Optimism about the U.S. economy fared even worse in the poll, with the number of respondents who say it's on the right track falling to 43% from 49% in June. 49% now say the economy is on the wrong track, up from 42% in June. I want to just do a little comment on the debate we had last night, the debate discussion. Now, for the most part, I wasn't talking all that much. You may have seen it, Charlie Kirk and Vaush. Vaush, of course, is a socialist. Charlie Kirk, of course, a conservative. And I was trying to make sure that they had their debate moment. I could absolutely come in and argue all of my positions. Interestingly, however, what we end up finding, the comments from so many people saying, Tim Pool is the worst person I know, and he made a good point. And I have to wonder about this. These people don't actually watch my videos. They see grifter clips out of context made to make fun of me. Why? Because I don't like the Democratic Party, because they're the ones doing stuff. I mean, you get Donald Trump for the past 4 years. Well, I guess 5 years ago and up to 4 years ago. And he's doing stuff. Trump was doing stuff. He was saying things. He was doing things. And boy, did this make Democrats angry. Republicans normally don't do anything. They are milquetoast fence sitters. I know the joke is that I am, but come on. Obviously, I'm not really. I rant about critical race theory, critical race applied principles, free speech, liberty. All the time, I have very strong positions on these. As for deeper moral questions on stuff, yeah, I'm pretty centrist. But what is the Republican Party doing? What do I have to say about the Republican Party other than they don't do anything and they offer up no meaningful resistance and they don't fight for our liberty or freedom? They're not fighting against the war machine. So I look at who's actually got institutional power. It's the Democratic Party. Now, if regular people on the left actually watched and didn't fall prey to that propaganda, they would see that in many circumstances yesterday, I was actually in disagreement with Charlie, which is fairly obvious to you guys who watch my videos. Let me show you why I am mad at Democrats. From the Washington Post, Biden's novel evictions defense. Maybe it's illegal, but it's worth it. Incredible. Look, with Donald Trump, we certainly had the executive orders. Donald Trump wanted to say end DACA, and the Supreme Court said you couldn't do it. People wondered how Obama was able to implement DACA through executive order, and Trump couldn't undo it. Yeah, you see, it's a double standard. Donald Trump was an elite. He is an elite. But he's still a political outsider, and they did not like him, and they did not like what he was doing. I got to be honest. It seems like there's a club with a plan. The Democratic establishment, the Republican establishment, the powerful corporate elites, they all mostly agree with each other. They may disagree sometimes. They don't fight each other. But when Trump came in, it seemed like Trump had no idea what their plan was. And he was like, I'm going to do things to help America. And they're like, stop, we have a plan. We're extracting resources and destroying the country to benefit China. Being a little bit facetious. But Trump wasn't playing that game, so they absolutely went after him. Now we have Joe Biden outright saying maybe it's illegal, but it's worth it. Amazing. The Washington Post says after days of his administration suggesting it couldn't do this legally, it did anyway. And Biden isn't really trying to put a good face on that either. The Washington Post says, amid pressure from congressional liberals, including Cori Bush, who demonstrated by sleeping outside of the U.S. Capitol for 4 nights, the Biden administration reversed course Tuesday and moved to effectively extend a pandemic-era eviction moratorium just the day before a top admin said that they looked hard and hadn't found a legal avenue to do such thing. It's amazing, isn't it? Joe Biden admittedly is doing things in defiance of the Supreme Court. Even Donald Trump wasn't doing that. Donald Trump didn't call in the Insurrection Act. He didn't send in the troops to get rid of these riots and these protests. Donald Trump did not do many things. He should have fired way more people. Joe Biden comes in and he's doing all this awful stuff. And you know what? Democrats just can't seem to see through it, unfortunately. And so the polling shows independent voters, you're probably an independent voter, actually drifting away on all of these issues. I think the data is quite revealing and it's very interesting and it's very bad for Democrats. Now, Gallup also has their own poll, and this is from a couple weeks ago, showing that Biden approval dropped to 50%, the lowest for him to date. This is still Gallup. I've got some other polls. And before we get into all that, I want to highlight some of the policies Joe Biden may be implementing that are freaking people out. Notably, this one from Bearing Arms. As many of you know, I'm a big 2A supporter at this time. Why Biden's new eviction moratorium should worry gun owners. I'll put it simply. If Joe Biden's attitude right now is that he can do what he wants and then you'll have to sue him later, yeah, he'll just start doing these things and doing whatever he wants and then hope people won't have the means to actually challenge him. That's not the way things are supposed to operate. Sometimes they do. But this is just one example of, I think, why people now are pushing back against Biden, Congress, including Republicans and Democrats, and why they're generally upset with leftist policy. Taking away people's rights without due process typically doesn't go over well. I bring you to the first poll we have from Civics. I want to highlight Black Lives Matter. This one I find very interesting because it's relatively apolitical. And what I mean by that is Black Lives Matter is a cultural political movement. It does have influence in the greater politics, but it is cultural. So they influence the Democrats in many ways. But they're not pushing policy, or I should say they're not. It's not a bill. It's not a law. And it's not someone running for office, for the most part. Obviously, you have Democrats who do support BLM, but BLM is of its own thing. Now, interestingly, the other day when we were talking with Vosh and Charlie, Vosh said something to the effect that people overwhelmingly support Black Lives Matter in this country, that most people do. And then I asked him, what do you think the percentage of people in this country who support Black Lives Matter is? And he didn't know. I said 45%. So this is the latest data from Civics with 237,664 responses. That's kind of why I like Civics. Not that it's perfect polling, but it's a very, very large sample size. So again, take it all with a grain of salt to be totally fair. And the total amount of responses go back a couple of years. Keep that in mind. But there is 45% support, 42% opposition. One of the most fascinating things is that net support is actually down. It's at 4%. That brings us all the way back to September of 2018. Black Lives Matter net support was climbing before the George Floyd incident. It was at 18%. And then now 4%. Even after the conviction of Derek Chauvin, it has still dropped. But here's what I find to be the most fascinating thing about this data. Obviously, when you select for Democrats, Civics shows us 86% of Democrats support Black Lives Matter. Now, that has gone down from a peak of 90% after the George Floyd incident. It's at 86, overwhelming support. Among Republicans, 86% oppose. Now, here's something truly interesting. Before the George Floyd incident, opposition was only 58% among Republicans. It wasn't overwhelmingly supporting it like Democrats were, and it wasn't a mirror image, overwhelming opposition. In fact, 33% said they neither support nor oppose, and 7% of Republicans actually supported it. Since then, opposition among Republicans has skyrocketed to 86%. Now, today, that polarization seems extremely obvious. It's a mirror image. If you're a Democrat, you like it. If you're a Republican, you don't. So the question remains, come the next election cycle, should these trends continue, who is going to benefit the most? Who will the independent voters side with? It may not be Republicans, but I don't think it will be Democrats. So again, could be Libertarian Party. Something fascinating happened. Independent voters going as far back as September of 2019. That's when, actually a little bit further, so about October of 2019, independent voters switched from opposing, and it's a back and forth, to supporting Black Lives Matter. There was a previous point where that flip had occurred, but then it flipped back. So we see around 36% support from independent voters and 34% opposition. Independent voters more closely tracked with Democrats, showing that among independent voters before George Floyd, 42% of independents supported Black Lives Matter. Today, it's very different. 43% oppose, 40% support. And what happened just before the inversion? Very interestingly, the conviction of Derek Chauvin. This is huge. When Derek Chauvin was on trial, there was still independent net support of 1% for Black Lives Matter. And just after the conviction, it inverts. I believe, okay, because look, I am an independent voter. I voted Republican last time around. The last time I voted, what did I vote for? It was Obama in 2008. It was a long time ago because I didn't care. I consider myself to be an independent. Right now, I'm really excited about the Mises Caucus and the Libertarian Party actually putting a rational face. Dave Smith, you're doing an amazing job, man. I'm really excited for the stuff that Dave is doing. I think he's a really smart guy, and that to me is fantastic. But I digress. I don't consider myself to be a partisan conservative. I didn't completely agree with Charlie Kirk, and I look at this. I obviously disagree with Black Lives Matter for some time. But I think it's because I'm more hyper aware of what's going on. I'm reading the news all day, every day. I think when you see rioters tearing through a city and you see jurors being shuffled into a courtroom with armed police with machine guns, and then you have Black Lives Matter activists and Antifa activists throwing a pig's head in blood or something on the door of what they thought was the home of witness. Yeah, regular people are going to be like, dude, this is crazy. Absolutely. But it's more than that. I highlight this just because Black Lives Matter, I believe, is a big cultural, it's a big component in the culture war. If we go back to 2018, independent voters had 40% at 40% opposed Black Lives Matter and 31% supported, according to Civics. There was an inversion, as I mentioned, and independent voters, along with some Republicans, overwhelmingly, well, I shouldn't say, but the majority supported Black Lives Matter after the George Floyd incident, and then riots happened, and then the Chauvin trial happened, and now it is back to opposition. In fact, Independent voter opposition today at 43% is 3 percentage points higher than it was in 2018. Independent voters are moving away from leftist politics, from Joe Biden, and from Democrats in Congress. I got more for you from Civics. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Joe Biden is handling his job as president? Now, fascinating. Civics shows with 83,000 responses, 49% disapprove, 44% approve. Can you predict exactly what's going to happen when I click that Democrat button? That's right. Among Democrats, 88% approve of Biden. Among Republicans, 93% disapprove. I can't expect, for the most part, to convince a staunch partisan Democrat to oppose Joe Biden, nor a staunch conservative Republican to support Joe Biden. There may be some overlap, but for the most part, it's approval and disapproval, and it's obvious. Well, then I bring you to the group that I think matters very much so moving forward, independent voters. Now, independent voters have long disapproved of Joe Biden. It started out pretty even, 43 to 43. And as time went on, disapproval went higher and higher and higher to its highest point today. 56% of independent voters disapprove of Joe Biden. 33% approve. This is big. I think this is big, big, big news for Republicans. We saw the Republican Party do extremely well in congressional races last November. They didn't take the House, but it was still a major upset. In Miami, I love citing this. It was a safe Democrat district that went Republican, shocking people. Now, let me tell you why. From Newsweek, Black Lives Matter support for socialism creates sharp divide with Cuban Americans. What do you think is going to happen when Republicans start picking up Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans, many different communities within the Latino and Hispanic community? It's going to be very, very bad news for Democrats. I think 2022 might swing very heavily in favor of Republicans, unless, of course, there's a lockdown and then a whole bunch of, lax rules on voting policy. Then who knows what'll happen. I want to show you a few more data points, though. So I mentioned Joe Biden's approval. How about, do you think this country, do you think things in this country are headed in the right direction, or have they gotten off on the wrong track? One thing I find actually fascinating is that overwhelmingly, Democrat, Republican, Independent thinks that we are going in the wrong direction. And only 34% think we're headed in the right direction. This has remained basically steady the whole time. Now, there was a brief period at the end of December, 71% were saying we are heading in the wrong direction, which is really interesting because this is weird. The attack on the U.S. Capitol caused a massive spike in people saying that we are headed in the right direction. No. I gotta be careful here because it's actually Joe Biden's election. When Joe Biden got elected, all of a sudden there was a huge spike in people saying that we were heading in the right direction. I think it's fairly obvious, my friends. That was Democrats. Check it out. This is amazing, isn't it? 90% of people said the country, 91, 92, 93, for years were saying the country was going in the wrong direction. Now, that to me is insane. You know why? Because even Democrats thought the economy was doing fairly well under Trump, but they thought the country was going in the wrong direction. And then, I don't know what this is. Trump tests positive for COVID, it says. And then the next, yeah. Is that what it says? What is this? Okay, Election Day 2020. When people saw that it was moving in favor of Joe Biden, Democrats all of a sudden had a nice little bump, but it was the inauguration where it flipped. And then 79% of people in the Democratic Party said in the right direction. Now, that's dropped to about 70. Now, among Republicans, very obviously, it's inverted, but not completely. Now, this I find to be really interesting. As the riots started occurring, Republicans thought we were going in the wrong direction more and more, though the majority, or I should say the majority, or the plurality, 45% of Republicans said the right direction. This is really interesting, and you need to understand this in terms of modern politics. Republicans didn't care that Trump was in office. When they saw the riots and they saw things weren't getting taken care of, they said, we're going in the wrong direction. Whereas Democrats didn't flinch at all over the Black Lives Matter riots. They didn't say good. They didn't say bad. They didn't care at all. Why? They probably don't know it's happening. The other day when we were talking with Vosh, she said, conservatives were taking Portland protests and screaming about it for weeks. And I'm like, did you read Michael Tracy's story where he went to all these small towns? And Vosh said he did. I'm like, so you knew that Black Lives Matter and Antifa were going all over the place and smashing things up. Republicans recognized that was bad, even with Trump as president, which I find truly fascinating. Now, of course, when Joe Biden was inaugurated, there's the major inversion. All of a sudden, we have obviously after November, there's the wrong direction and the major spike. But again, I think independent voters are the most important. Republicans need to win them over. Democrats need to win them over. And here we can see it's been fairly static. But right now, 63% of independent voters think we are headed in the wrong direction. Again, very, very good news for the GOP moving into the midterm elections, though. I got to be honest, I don't see any good reason to vote for Republicans. I guess I take that back. One good reason, stopping Democrats from having a House majority. But why should I even bother? I mean, let me ask you an honest question. I know there's a lot of partisan conservatives who will answer and say, you have to stop the Democrats from gaining power. And my answer is just, but the Republicans don't do anything. It's like someone's trying to bash the door down. And instead of stopping the person, we put a little door stop in the back of it. I'm like, that's not going to do anything. I mean, it's going to slow them down a little bit. But why would I waste my energy doing that? I don't know. I suppose I can jump out the window or I can call somebody who might actually do something. The problem, we're in this big room and the Democrats are banging on the door. And you got a bunch of people being like, we're going to put a door stop in the door. And I'm like, why don't we call for help from like, I don't know, the Libertarian Party or something? And then not enough people agree with that. So then the Libertarian Party doesn't make it. And I'll be honest too. The past candidates, the Libertarian Party has been I'm sorry, guys. I don't consider myself big L libertarian, but I would say I definitely like the Libertarian Party better than the Republicans or the Democrats. But the past candidates you had, look, George Jorgensen seems like a really nice person, just bad candidate. Gary Johnson seems like a great person, bad candidate. Now, Dave Smith, on the other hand, shout out again. I saw some people tweeting at me. They're like, Dave, Tim shouted you out on his video. And I'm like, well, look, man, there's somebody I can take seriously. No joke. Great perform. What's the right word? I don't want to say performance in the sense that it's like performative, but when he's on TV talking with these people, one of the things I absolutely love is when the leftists are like, yeah, well, Donald Trump did this. And then Dave's like, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't like him. And I'm like, yes, they have no argument. If their argument is only, yeah, well, orange man bad, then you finally got someone who's like, I don't care. I care about principles. Now, to be honest, I do think what we're seeing with critical race applied principles is horrifying. And that is, in my opinion, a good reason to stop Democrats. Unfortunately, I just don't think anything's going to get done with the Republican Party. Sorry, that's just the reality. What has Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy done at all? Nothing. They just sit there. So, in the end, I think one of the big factors at play will be the economy. And when we take a look at the national economy and how people feel, they say for the most part, 36% say it's going fairly good. I don't agree with that. I really don't. Fairly good? No. I mean, actually, it's tough to say fairly good and fairly bad. I wouldn't say unsure. I feel like it's just kind of 50-50. These restrictions, the mandates in New York City, I think are bad, are going to get worse. There's shortages. There's concern about there's a labor shortage. Airlines can't staff their planes, so they're shutting down flights. There's fuel shortages in the Pacific Northwest because of a lack of truckers. There's gas stations across the United States that have no fuel because of a lack of truckers. And I see all these businesses are struggling to stay open because nobody wants to work. I wouldn't call that doing well. So actually, I should say it's not 50-50. I think it's fairly bad, if not very bad. Maybe that's just because I'm paying attention. But of course, I want to play this game. Among Democrats, 58% say fairly good. Are you nuts? No, they just don't care. It's tribalism. Among Republicans, they say it is very bad. I have to say I kind of agree with that based on a lot of factors. But among independent voters, they actually still say fairly bad, not very bad. But the next highest is very bad. Independent voters, I think, will be the most important voting bloc coming up in 2020. Now, we're really far away. We're over a year out from the 2020 midterm elections. So perhaps it's a little preemptive for me to make any kind of predictions or analysis based on the current data. However, I think this was important, and I wanted to look at this stuff because, Honestly, during the past couple of years when we had midterms followed by presidential primary, followed by presidential election, I was actually tracking these polls quite a bit to see how the news was affecting public perception. And considering we're in that lull year where there's no election and there's no primary, there's no midterm, whatever, I haven't really taken a look at what the sentiment from the regular people was. Here we can see, I suppose, good news for Republicans. Now, I can certainly hope the Republicans actually do something. And I will say this. If the Republican Party brings about some populists, fighters, people who actually want to make a difference and fight for something, well, then I think it's something worth voting for. There are several Republicans that I think Rand Paul's fantastic. We always give him a shout out. I think Thomas Massie does a great job. There's a few others. If you have Democratic politicians advocating for things, but you don't have Republican politicians advocating for things, then what's the point of voting for the Republicans if the only answer is we pause for a minute or we move to the left? There needs to be a way to say, hey, some of those left-wing things I actually agree with. Many of these I don't. And then I look to my right and I see nothing. So it's either to say, I don't agree with that, Democrats, and the Republicans being like, but we're not going to do anything anyway. So that's been the problem for some time. And that's why I think things might be changing, maybe for the better. This means that many people might start as libertarians running in the Republican Party to make a change. Populists are going to start running. We've already seen them. They are doing it. And it may mean that many people just start pushing for the Libertarian Party. I'd love to see that, by the way. I wonder, though, because of the propagandistic mind lock the Democratic Party has with control of the media, I don't think you'll be able to break away enough of the more libertarian Democrats who unfortunately believe fake news. And yes, I mean that. There are many Democrats who don't pay attention, don't know, and are just being fed bad information. And I'll use yesterday's discussion with Vosh as a good example. Vosh didn't know many things. To be fair, I'm not trying to be mean to him, but he said the 1619 Project wasn't being taught in schools. Yes, it is. We pulled it up. He said critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. We pulled up the National Educators Association, one of the largest unions. And I said, here it is. They're saying it. He didn't know that. So he has interesting ideas. One of his ideas was like a business structured kind of like a republic. And I really liked that idea. And he said that was socialism, or at least alluded to the fact that it could be. I don't care what you call it. I actually like the idea of co-ops, and Charlie Kirk agreed. Absolutely. He's like, I got a soft spot for the working class. I agree with that. And I'm like, these are good things. But when we asked him about certain core issues, he didn't know. And I think that's the important issue here. Really what all of this boils down to is, do you trust? And that was one of the things I said when Charlie and Vosh were arguing over vaccines. I said, look, Dr. Brett Weinstein, brilliant, smart, PhD, evolutionary biologist with opinions. And then you've got government institutions. Who do you trust? Vosh said he trusts the institutions. Charlie said he didn't. You can't tell someone who to have faith in or who to believe. So ultimately, I think what it comes down to is that Charlie's read a bunch of information from non-mainstream sources and other doctors who he believes, and Vosh trusts the government institutions and mainstream media. Because of that, you have a difference of opinion and belief. The root cause of everything is, who do you trust? Which is the challenge. How do you convince people who are more libertarian leaning, who might oppose the corrupt establishment and the wars, but because they don't investigate the news themselves, they just think Donald Trump is an evil madman coming to take over the world, and then they vote in a corrupt crony corporatist that is Joe Biden? I don't have all the answers, my friends. I just am a guy who reads stuff on the internet and does research all day, and I can only say, at the very least, informing people and showing them this stuff may be one of the best paths forward. Sharing this video with people may be one of the best paths forward. Because I'll tell you this, I love seeing this. When we had Vosh on last time, we had him on this time, and there's so many leftists saying, Tim wasn't actually that bad. I was surprised, actually. It's like, maybe if you actually watched my videos, you'd be like, oh, okay, I understand what he's saying. I think it's absolutely fascinating. People were saying, like, it seems like Tim actually cares about COVID more than Charlie does. And I'm like, did they just assume that I was an anti-vaxxer? Yes, because that's what they do. It's tribalism. They don't care about what my actual opinion is. And it's insane. People need to actually watch, investigate. And I'll tell you what, this is why I think there's an issue with independents and Republicans drifting to one side and Democrats drifting to the other. When the riots happened, the Republicans said, we don't care if it's Trump in office, the country is going in the wrong direction. And the Democrats said, we don't care. The country's been in the wrong direction no matter what. And they didn't even think the Black Lives Matter protests were making it move in the right direction. Isn't that fascinating? It's because the Democrats follow the narrative. Republicans and independents are willing to question and challenge it. And therein lies a big problem for everybody. Everyone should question and challenge the narrative. Authority should always be questioned, Donald Trump or otherwise, Joe Biden or otherwise. But as we can see, the hyper-partisans tend not to do that as much. And substantially worse is that Democrats almost never do it. It was amazing. The first time we had Vosh on, Vosh said, Tim, you're far right. And we laughed like, what? It's like I could do a rant about progressive taxes and universal health care. And then the left is like, that's not enough. That's not enough to have those actual beliefs and opinions. You have to support Democrats. I'm like, why? They're corrupt cronies. The only reason I support the Republicans was in opposition for the most part. I think that was a terrible idea. To be fair, Donald Trump had a bunch of policies I did agree with. School choice was big, opposing critical race theory. Long story short, this is actually a fairly long video. I'm not a fan of the Republican Party, never have been. Donald Trump was something different. Bernie Sanders had my support initially, and then he caved to the Democrats. So I tell you this, you get an honest, not racist. I can't stand critical race theory. I can't stand the white nationalists. I think they're all insane and wrong. You give me classical liberal and traditionally liberal debate, and I will be very happy. Traditional liberal, classical liberal, or I should say social liberal and classical liberal. These are very similar positions with minor differences. I actually am not a classical liberal. I'm a social liberal, but it's almost the same thing. I just am more socially progressive than someone who is classically liberal. That's about it. Instead, what do we have? Last night, Charlie Kirk, a conservative, I didn't agree with him on most things. On facts, there were some things we agreed on and some things we didn't. I challenged him on some issues and others I agreed and challenged Vosh. Why? Because the reality is Tim Pool is a centrist, but the left has gone so far left and believes so much BS and bullcrap, they can't tell that anymore. People were surprised I was agreeing with Vosh. I'm like, why? I'm center left, literally, if you look at all of my political positions. But because I hate the corrupt crony Democratic Party, and I think they're the biggest problem we have in this country right now. So you know what? We'll see how things play out. Tides are changing. I don't know how this will progress into the future, but I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.